Hi, and welcome to another edition in the Spotlight with Mayor Jeffrey Mims. And today I have two special guests. Of course, you hear me say that all the time because all my guests are special. So, Michelle, okay, and Aaron.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you guys for being here. Really
thank you,
appreciate
sir.
Okay. So, you are working for the city of Dayton, and you work in a mediation center. But before we get into talking about the details of what you do in that space and how you got to that particular area, give me a little bit of background about yourself. Yeah.
So I am from Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
And I went to Kent State University.
Okay, my daughter went to Kent State for a
really?
master's program.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yep.
It's a great school.
Yep. Yes, it is.
So I was wandering through my first couple years trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I took every introduction class that there was.
Okay.
And so I found this introduction to conflict management, and I thought, this is really interesting, and nobody talks about conflict, so I wanted to learn as much as I could. Mm-hmm. And so I took the next class and the next class, and the next thing you know, I graduated with a degree in applied conflict management. And a job opened up at the city of Dayton, and I just applied for it to see what would happen, and I was hired as a part-time case manager. And
Okay.
I told my boss at the time, Tom, I said, I'm going to stay here for 6 months, and when I get bored, I'll move on. And he sort of smiled and said, okay, let me know when you get bored. And today is my 26th anniversary with the city.
Okay.
And I haven't been bored yet.
Okay, so 6 months turned into 26 years.
Yes.
Great. Okay,
Yes.
great. So, Aaron Primm, how you doing?
Yes, fantastic.
Good.
So I'm from Huber Heights, and so I went
Okay.
to Wayne High School. I went away to college at Fisk University. I came home, and I became a teacher. And so while I was teaching, there's probably about 2 or 3 years in, I had heard from someone who said that they were going to be a volunteer at the Mediation Center or going to be a volunteer. Something in my spirit said that would be absolutely amazing. Simultaneously, I was so busy in what I was doing at that point, I said, far too busy to volunteer to do anything. Working is more than enough at this point. 5 years later or so, heard from a totally different person who said, you know what? Dayton Mediation Center, I'm thinking about being a volunteer there. I said, hey, I'd heard about this place before. I thought that would be amazing. And so I was able to, at the last second, get into the class, and Michelle and folks said it was okay because it was like 2 or 3 days before the beginning of the class. This was back in 2014. Got there, and it was more amazing than I even thought it would be. And so I became a contractor, and maybe about 8 months in, one of the contractors left, and there was a full-time position. At that point, there was three full-time positions, and I was able to get that. And so I became full-time in 2015, and I'm still here at this point. I'll have 10 years full-time in August.
Man, that's special. That is special. Yeah. I sort of got into it by accident myself as well. One of the things that happened, I think I was treasurer for the teachers union, and we were going through some things relative to desegregation, and the NEA, National Education Association, had this program, and the treasurer of the organization, the vice president, did not want to go. The president didn't want to go. And so, Jeff, he likes talking to people, doing all these things, so let's let him go. So actually it was a 4-day program, 4 days a week, once a month for 4 months. And it was just tremendous in terms of going through those processes. And it was something that helped a whole lot as we were going through desegregation skills with the city of Dayton in the school system when we started desegregation in 1973 initially. And then to carry on the major program in 1976 is when we started that process. And it's been really a godsend for me because it's the type of skill set that I use with all of my classes. And I taught for 10 and a half years and no fights except for one in 10 years out there I taught. Did the same thing with my track team, the same thing with my soccer team, and working with them in those spaces. And it created a real big family atmosphere, if you will. And I know you guys are talking about it because you guys are experts. So you do it a whole lot more than I do. I probably do it, just for fun sometimes, but the aspect of what you do every day in your work life. And one of the things that I know we have done with the city of Dayton in terms of working with you was putting you in a space where you are helping our police with the whole mediation process so that in many cases, if our police are not necessarily needed, this came through our police reform process. Talk about your excitement and the involvement that you do and the type of things that you do to help the city as well as helping the police in that process.
Well, we've been working with the Dayton Police Department since the early 90s.
Right.
And so we've had this partnership with them, not in the way that we do now, but
Okay.
The police officers could send referrals to mediation for neighbor issues. So we build a relationship that way. And then after the police reform, we did start the mediation response unit. So we spent about a year creating and implementing this process. And we weren't sure what to expect. This is the first in the nation.
Okay.
And we didn't know what the community would think. We didn't know what the police would think. And now we're 3 years into the program, and I'd say we're really successful. I think people really appreciate how quickly we can get out to a call, that we listen in a different way. We can take the time to help people just by supporting them through letting them say what they need to say and make decisions for themselves. We're not the Dayton Miracle Center, so we can't fix everything.
Okay.
But we can definitely try to help support people as best we can with not only the conflict that they're in, but connect them to resources, food assistance, housing. We have a social worker that we're contracted with through Goodwill Easter Seals. So we have lots of different partners. So it's not just a one and done. We try to provide holistic support for folks.
Okay. Yeah. So, Aaron, before we start the show, a couple minutes ago, we were talking about some of the definitions, if you will, of mediation. So from your perspective, just throw some things out that you think mediation would stand for, or why it's important, and how does it affect maybe individuals or organizations?
Right, it's such a good question.
Okay.
One thing is that's important to know about mediators, specifically us as transformative mediators, that we are neutral third-party support people in talking about things.
Okay.
So they can hopefully have more productive, constructive conversations. And so at our base, as we talk about transformative, we believe that people can figure things out given the opportunity to do so. So we talk about giving people a voice and choice, an opportunity to talk about things, talk things through, with us being there as a supportive other in that particular space in order to support them in multiple different ways of hearing themselves and hearing the other. And at the end of the day, many people are able to figure out things on their own. And so as transformative mediators, as transformative responders, we are not looking to tell people what to do. Right. We support people in their opportunity, their ability to think through things, and it's an interesting thing in the way that many people don't think that that's possible. Oftentimes, and I was just talking about this earlier today, when people think about or ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I'm a mediator. They're like, "Well, what is that?" And so let's go through the spiel talking about, hey, neutral third-party support people and talking about things. And now as a mediation responder, as the coordinator, supporting the community straight away, being able to get out there with them so they're able to think through whatever the circumstances were that had them call 911 in the first place. It's interesting, as Michelle was talking about, we've had this relationship with the police for a very long time. That novelty has led to our success with our programming, where they believe in us and allow us the opportunity to be able to go to community and meet them where they're at in a way that years ago I recall us thinking about these things like, it'd really be nice if we could just go straight out to these calls. We're getting the referrals, thank you for the referrals to police. We're like, but if we just meet them, the community members, the police, or the residents straight away at their circumstances, maybe we could nip some more things in the bud and go figure years later.
Yeah, correct. Because as you watch the news, listen to so many of the stories that are told across the nation, where policemen sometimes, because of the high charge set of responsibilities that they have, especially dealing with conflict, if they're called into a situation, often they're already charged up. They're ready for some type of defense mechanism, maybe even have to approach someone who's in the middle of something violent. And we've seen that all those responses are not necessarily responsible, or necessary, I should say, at that particular point in time. If you have neighbors, like you mentioned, who have a conflict, and when they see someone coming armed with a gun, maybe 2 or 3 people, they're on edge themselves. Your situation is different. And I know in terms of dealing with police reform, we talked about a softer approach. We talked about how to maybe de-escalate a situation as opposed to escalating the situation. We talk about for a minute, your thoughts on how you feel your approach is softer, if you will, and has more benefit in terms of that process?
Sure. So we had a situation, it was a neighbor issue, and a neighbor moved in. They had a lot of pets. The neighbor down the street was getting concerned because the pets were constantly running down through the neighborhood. And so the woman called us because she's like, there's a problem here, but I don't want to call the police. I don't feel comfortable going down and talking to them because I've heard them get loud before, and so I just want somebody to like support them and see what's going on. And so we knocked on the door, and the dad came out, and he was really confused, like, who are you? And then mom came out, and the kids came out, and grandma came out, and they were all standing on the porch looking at us like, who are you? So we explained that we respond to calls that are nonviolent, no weapons, and there was a neighbor that had some concerns about the pets. And they said to me, this is really neat because we would have been really offended if the police came out for something like this. And so to have a different option really helped the situation. It didn't escalate it, as you said, where neighbors now have, the first time they're going to meet is because of the police being called out. So we were able to talk with them, and we found out that the dogs were opening the door. They figured out how to open it and get out. And so he gave us his number, and he said, please give this to the neighbor, and if there's problems in the future, just feel free to call us. The yelling was about the dogs getting out. He thought his son was letting the dogs out. So when they finally witnessed that the littlest one was smart and figured it out, they solved the issue. But that was I think that's one of the benefits, is just being, like you said, it's when you walk up to somebody and offer them some water, it just sort of just de-escalates thing in a way that, that maybe this response is helpful for.
Right. And I thought of something new, Mary, as you were talking, you and Michelle were talking. One thing that we do at the Mediation Center is we're very relational in the way that we interact with people.
Okay.
And so just as the basis of what we do, we hear people in a way that is different than pretty much any organization, any other piece of the city, of most organizations. Just because when people are talking, we are trained to listen to them in a way where when they say certain things, then we're going to intervene, support them so they can be more strong and responsive instead of weak and self-absorbed. This is all mediator talk that I'm throwing around here, but we want to support people so that they're able to be in a better place emotionally, in a way that they can talk about things, that they can be more responsive versus being reactive. It also feels as if that as mediators, transformative responders, that when we're able to come to a situation in the world via 911 at this point, or folks that are coming to the office, we respond to people in a level way, where even when we're out in the world, when I mean level, it's, we're looking to listen, we're looking to hear where the person's coming from, and we're there to respond to them in a way where they can start to hear themselves better, hear others better. Right. And so this is the way that we approach each situation. And so we don't have to be on the elevator as far as, how we approach people. Because there are different circumstances, as you know, that are happening out in the world where you definitely have to come with a different mind frame, different attitude, depending on the situation. But we know the types of calls that we deal with, the types of situations that are best fit for us. And so that allows for us to remain even-keeled, but alert.
Right.
Depending on the situation.
Yeah. One of the things that I have observed over the decades in taking some young people out of school for a day and a half, and then we took sixth and seventh graders, 6th, 7th, 8th graders. When I ran some programs in 3 of our middle schools in Dayton Public Schools that were part of this Annie Casey Foundation called New Futures. And on any given day, seriously, any given day, anywhere from 5 to 10 kids were waiting in the principal's office to be disciplined because they had done something in the classroom where the teacher had said, get out. They go down to the principal's office, and et cetera. And looking at that, talking to some of the principals about how we could change that behavior as far as the young people were concerned. And many of them were so focused on, I got to raise these test scores, we got to do this, we got to do that. And so I'd seen the research, of course, in terms of understanding how beneficial this whole process worked, especially with young people. And so I'd given them 3 weeks. I said, okay, so I gave you guys 3 weeks to make up your mind. So since I'm in charge, here's what we're going to do. Okay, so we decided to go ahead and take 60 kids from each one of the middle schools, 380 kids, and the cluster leaders from each one of those schools, and we did work with them in terms of conflict mediation and the whole training process. Foundational to that process was helping each young person understand that he or she had value. So we talked about in group settings, their zodiac signs, their birthday, their favorite color, how many brothers and sisters you have, how many good things, bad things about yourself, those kind of situations. I mean, of course, more good than bad, okay? But it gave them something foundational to think about themselves, and so increasing their value. Once we got back to the schools, we started the process, and immediately the change was evident because in each team, in each school, we had a conflict mediation team in each cluster. So we had 10 kids in each cluster, and they were the ones that would take care of those kind of problems. So much so that even a teacher who was not good in discipline, some of the kids came back and said, well, tell you what, Miss Jones, you just take care of teaching us. We'll take care of the discipline. And so that gives you a really good feeling when young people take control of themselves because they find out a lot of value in terms of themselves, especially in terms of others. Now, one of the really good reasons why it worked for us is that at least a third or half of the kids that we had taken out were the ones who were creating the problem. So now you neutralize them. Now you got them as problem solvers. So when you go through your processes and you're trained, and I know we're going to be using you guys more in this whole mediation with peace and the whole peace campaign that we're working with. As you go through your processes, what are some of the approaches that you use? For example, if you're using those skill sets and training young people in those processes, what are some of the kind of things you guys do?
So some of the work that we do with young people, like you said, we teach them the different skill sets within the model of mediation.
Okay.
And like as Aaron pointed out a lot, it's really about listening to listen, not to just give
Right.
your answer back. And so if kids learn to deeply listen to what the person's saying, that really helps shift that person feeling, like Aaron said, negative, upset, angry, and frustrated. When you feel heard, you just automatically start shifting to a better place because you don't feel so out of control. You don't feel like nobody's listening to you. So that's one of the skills that we teach. We also teach how to ask questions, how to view people. That's a really important thing. So if you view somebody as this is a person who's angry and they're just unreasonable, then that's how you're going to treat them. But if you look at the situation as here's somebody who's in crisis and they're really upset about something and they don't typically act this way, so something's wrong, and you look at it from the view of this person's in a crisis, you will treat them differently and you'll listen to them and you'll not judge in a way. So those are some of the things that we try to teach the kids how to do. And then also identify when their kids are out there talking to other kids, they know when things are brewing. And so
Right.
if we could teach them to identify this situation needs some support because this is about to blow up into something else. So just identifying when those situations are happening.
Okay. Speculate for a moment. I mentioned that sometimes when you have some of the young ladies or young men who are maybe responsible for some of the conflict that you have in the location, speculate for a second in terms of when they have a skill set, why is it that they sometimes tend to be better than some of the normal young people who are not in the mix of conflict on a more regular basis?
So that's a good question. Feels like something that is important in the midst of conflict in order to really navigate it to any degree is to recognize that oftentimes it's not personal.
Right.
This is one of the major pieces that makes conflict difficult is that because the person's talking to us, they're looking at us, they're using our name and saying whatever it is they're saying is not working for us, that somehow is personal. And once you gain recognition that conflict most of the time is not about us personally, that it's really about that person to whatever degree it is, it just happens that we're in their space at that moment, then it changes the landscape and we're able to approach that conflict differently. So this might be something that's happening there.
Okay.
Well, and I think, too, some of the kids that have dealt with conflict before, they're more comfortable in it. So where people might shy away and say, I just want to avoid this, these might be the kids that go forward to step in and address it. So they're
Okay.
not afraid of conflict.
Okay. One of the things that in terms of research and looking at the type of situations that happen with violence in certain communities, or especially gun violence, and talking with political leaders or safety leaders, for example. They mentioned that in urban communities, there are not as many guns as there are in suburban and rural communities. However, the reason why we have an increased number of shootings, if you will, or violence related to guns is that the tools of how to identify and resolve conflict are absent in those communities. Give me some conversation about that. That makes sense to you?
No, it does. As a former teacher myself, 12 years,
Yep.
I've seen all kinds of things. And so it feels as if, as you're saying, if we don't have the tools to address situations like mediation, for example, then individuals are more apt to take it to that next level or to deal with things in the way they do. One of the things we talk about quite a bit in one of our trainings, well, probably the training, which we call Responding Effectively to Conflict, is what people do in the midst of conflict that is not working, that doesn't work, that we do anyway. What are these things that we do? And one of the things that comes up is fighting, hitting, right? And so I typically ask the people there, I said, well, what is the rationale? Why is it as humans that we tend to want to hit each other? It's because, well, I would say one of the reasons is because we're not feeling heard, which is what happens naturally in the midst of conflict, that people can't hear each other well.
Okay.
And so if you don't hear me, Mayor, when I'm saying something to you, then my next thing I have to do, I've got to get your attention. And if I don't have any other tools, the tool I have is to try to put hands on you, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's where it's nice to have tools like mediation, so that people have tools. They say, you know what, I don't have to jump on this person for this reason. Mm-hmm. I have some tools. We can talk through these things to one degree or another, and we can start to figure out where each other is coming from.
Okay. These thoughts, again, with more and more individuals feeling like they have challenges that they're somebody else's fault. They don't know who to blame because of they may come from a family. They come home from school, and all their belongings are out on the street because of foreclosure crisis, or they've been evicted. And it's a challenge for that young person that may not understand all the circumstances around them. And let's say, for example, that very next day, this is testing week, for example, and there are people who sometimes are not understanding of how emotionally charged this young person may be, trying to think about being their best self in terms of taking the test, your proficiency tests, et cetera, or just being their regular self in terms of dealing with the death of a close family member, and they're on a sports team or there's something along those lines, and the feeling of they're letting the team down because they can't be there or they can't be their best self. Talk about some of those kind of things that you would imagine that you probably have had some contact with in terms of addressing young people or even adults who are in these situations.
Okay, Michelle.
Yeah, I would say the eviction crisis right now is really hitting hard the students in our community. It's hard enough. We talk to the parents on the phone, and most of the time they're not sure what to do. They're just paralyzed with fear, with confusion, with frustration, not knowing what to do. And so I can't imagine being a child in that environment, trying to go to school and act like nothing's wrong when you don't know, you have nothing stable at this point. You don't know where you're living, where you're going to get your next meal. So those are some of the things that we see out in the community. We also see issues with parents and kids, parents or guardians or kids having disagreement with each other, and the parent feeling so frustrated that they have to call 911 to get some support because there's no other option.
Right.
And so us being able to come out to the house and talk with the parent and the child gives that child a voice in the conversation that maybe they don't have when a parent's upset and they're getting lectured. The kid actually has an opportunity to say something and have space to have a voice, and we help create that for them, and so that they can explain what's going on with them. Because a lot of times we don't hear that as parents unless we really listen, and sometimes we have to slow it down to be able to hear that. Yeah. So those are the ways that we try to support our community members and our young people.
Right. Okay. And in that process, Mayor, we're able to slow down these conversations. Things seem to be going so fast in conflict, it's very difficult for people to think. It's also difficult for people to hear.
Yeah.
And so when we arrive, things slow down a bit, which naturally allows for people to start thinking. When they start thinking, then they're able to start to
take time, take a breath,
That's right.
Relax for a second. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the increased familiarity of the subjects help, especially if they have a strong positive self-concept? How does that contribute to, or does that detract from the ability to minimize conflict?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, but if you're clear and strong inside of what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, the clearer you can get about your situation, it seems more grounding. Mm-hmm. And so you can handle conflict differently if you're feeling calm, less confused, stronger, have a plan of what you want to do, what's important to you, what's not important to you. Right. And so if we can help support that, then we can help people shift to a better place so that they can handle conflict differently.
Okay, you talked earlier about listening in terms of conversation. What if, again, another scenario here. What if a young person finds something that they're listening to in common with themselves? Maybe someone's talking about the fact that my favorite color is blue. And it comes out in the conversation that the favorite color is blue. Does that contribute to or take away from the maybe positive thoughts that person may have about that person that they're just meeting or interacting with?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question, Mayor. It feels as if it could go either way with that.
Okay.
That if individuals or young people, in this particular case, if they're able to identify or grasp onto something that feels like it's integral or aligns with themselves, then depending on what it is, they go along with that.
Okay.
And so if we were able to introduce something that we would call positive, right? There's something, at least in mediator talk, we would say is blue or strong responsive. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they would be able to take that and use that in a way that works for them.
Now, unless they're a person who say, well, blue is my favorite color, it can't be yours.
Right.
So, it says, good, we got something in common. We get the same favorite color, I've seen people argue over their favorite color. I've given this example, blue, red. You can argue all day long, but you're probably not going to change my mind. Now, someone comes and say, oh, man, what about purple? That's the combination between two colors,
Mm-hmm.
They say, oh, okay, all right, good. So we can work with that, Well, look here, time has gone by quickly, as it always does. And, again, just wanted to say how much I appreciate you and appreciate the listeners as well, because I think this is very beneficial. I think more and more, as we have more and more conversations about how we can identify, resolve conflict as far as our society is concerned, that can make us the most peaceful city in the world, which is part of the goal that we have as far as this whole peace initiative is concerned. And having a leg up, I think, on most cities, because we do have the Peace Museum here, and we do have that whole situation that we work with NATO a couple of times, helping to solve conflict. So I think following along that line, those footsteps, if you will, moving forward with Dayton, being in those spaces where we can make all of our individuals, young and old, those with gray hair like myself, try to feel like they can be a strong contributor to making Dayton the most peaceful city in the world. So again, thank you guys so much, and thank you for listening. Welcome the audience, if you will, to another edition of In the Spotlight with Jeffrey Mims, Mayor Jeffrey Mims, if you will. And looking at the aspect of, you can see this on www.daytonohio.gov or on Channel 6. We have on Channel 6, it'll be playing on a continuous basis. So again, thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
Having
Okay.
us.
All right. Thanks again. Okay. And good luck to all the work you got to do.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right.